Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Inshallah, I hope today to briefly go over all of the rulings regarding Siyam. As we know, Ramadan is approaching, and it's important for a person to enter upon the month with knowledge of that which is obligatory upon them, and of knowledge of that which is not permissible, which is haram, and which a person should avoid during this month. As the ulama mentioned, I believe Ibn Abdul Barr narrated ijma' on this, that it's not permissible for a Muslim to embark on any action without having knowledge of first whether that action is permissible or not, without first knowing what that ruling has, what that action has as a ruling in the Sharia. So here, when it comes to the rulings regarding Ramadan and fasting, we can divide them up into 10 sections, which we'll go over inshallah. The first section is rulings regarding the month of Ramadan itself, أحكام شهر Ramadan. So that relates to rulings such as the virtue of the month, rulings regarding Laylatul Qadr, and other than that. The second section will be شروط الصوم, the conditions for the validity of a person's fast, the conditions for obligation and the conditions also for validity. The third section will be أحكام أهل الأعذار, rulings regarding to those people who are excused from fasting, who have an udhr. The fourth section will relate to أحكام الإمساك, the rulings regarding al-imsak, which is the case in which a person is not considered a person who is sa'im, who is fasting, but they are still obligated to refrain from eating and drinking, and all of the other rulings, all of the other things which become impermissible by siyam. The fifth section will relate to mufsidat as-sawm, the things which invalidate one's fast. The sixth section will relate to mustahabbat, al-mustahabbat wal-makruhat, those things which are recommended during a person's fast and those things which are disliked. The seventh section will relate to ahkam al-kaffara, the rulings regarding al-kaffara, expiation which a person has to pay if they have sexual intercourse during the month of Ramadan when they are obligated to fast. The eighth section will relate to ahkam al-qada, the rulings regarding making up days of Ramadan which have been missed. The ninth section will relate to sawm al-tatawwu', the supererogatory or the nafila fasting, the fasting which is not obligatory. And the final section relate to ahkam al-i'tikaf, the rulings regarding i'tikaf. Now getting into the first section, those relating to the month of Ramadan. So the first ruling is that it's recommended to say Shahr Ramadan, to call the month Shahr Ramadan, and this is better than just saying Ramadan. Though saying just Ramadan is mubah, it is not disliked, it is permissible, mubah. And Ramadan is not a name of Allah. Although some ulama said that Ramadan is a name of Allah, this is a weak opinion. Rather, what's correct is that it's not a name of Allah. And Ramadan is afdal al-shuhur fi sana. It is the best of all of the months in the year. And the best of Ramadan, it is al-ashr al-akhir, the last 10 nights of Ramadan, the last 10 days and nights of Ramadan are the best part of Ramadan. وَلَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ أَفْضَلُ اللَّيَالِي فِي السَّنَةِ, and Laylatul Qadr, it is the best night in all of in the whole year, in Ramadan and outside of it. That it is the best night. As for the best day, Yawm al-Nahr is the best day, according to the madhab. It is Yawm al-Nahr, the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, which is Al-Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Adha. That is the best day according to the madhab. So which one is better? The last 10 days of Ramadan or last 10 nights, or the first 10 days and 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah? According to the madhab, عشر ذي الحجة أفضل من العشر الأخير من رمضان أيامها ولياليها. According to the madhab, the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are better than the last 10 nights of Ramadan, both in the days and in the nights. And waqila, in the second opinion, the last 10 nights are better than the last 10 nights of Ramadan are better than the first 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah, but the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are better than the last 10 days of Ramadan. That's the second opinion. And Laylatul Qadr تطلب في العشر الأخير. It is sought out in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. وتتنقل فيها, and it changes from year to year. So one year it might be the 21st night, next year it might be 27th, next year it might be another number, and so on. وأوتارها آكدها, and it's most likely to be on an odd night, يعني 21, 23, 25, 27, or 29. And the 27th night is أرجاها, it is the most likely in any year to be Laylatul Qadr. As for the sign of Laylatul Qadr, its alama, it is that it's a night which is neither cold nor hot, and in the morning after it, when the sun rises, it rises without having a lot of shua, yani its rays are not strong in the morning which follows the night of Ramadan, the night of Laylatul Qadr. And as-sawm wajibun fi Ramadan bil ijma'. Fasting is obligatory in Ramadan by ijma'. And as-sawm or siyam, linguistically it means al-imsak, to withhold from something. That's why it says in the Quran, إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لَكَ صَوْمًا إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا فَلَنْ نُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. In Surah Maryam alayhi salam said, I have made an oath to Allah Azza Jal to sawm, to withhold. But here the withholding was speaking about speech. As for in the Shara', the meaning is al-imsak biniyatin, or al-imsaku binniyati an ashya'a makhsusa fi zamanin mu'ayyan min shakhsin makhsus. The technical or the Shara'i definition of fasting, it is to withhold with intention from specific things during a specific time for a specific person. Now the entering of the month of Ramadan, it happens برؤية الهلال ليلة 30 أو بإتمام 30 من شعبان. There are two ways in which we can know that the month of Ramadan has entered. Either by completing 30 days from Sha'ban, then the next day is certainly Ramadan, or by seeing the moon on the 9th of the 30th of Sha'ban. So after 29 days of Sha'ban are finished, in that following night, which would precede the 30th day of Sha'ban, if the moon is seen, then this is declared to be, meaning the next day would be declared to be Ramadan. And no consideration is given to al-hisab al-falaki, to calculations. Rather, it has to be seen by the eye. So as for calculations, they're not giving any consideration. And some ulama have narrated ijma' on that, even though there is an opinion from Ibn Surayj al-Shafi'i which says that it's calculations are valid, but this opinion is shadh. Rather, what the ijma' has been established on before Ibn Surayj is that calculations are not given consideration when it comes to the establishment of the months in the Sharia. Now, the moon which has to be seen for the night to enter has to be seen at night. So if the moon is seen in the daytime, then this is not given any consideration. And this moon which is seen in daytime, it is actually لِلَّيْلَةِ الْمُقْبِلَةِ. It's considered that it's going to rise in the next night, not in the previous night. But seeing the moon during the daytime is not given any consideration. لا تثبت به الأحكام حتى يرى بالليل. It's not given any consideration until it is seen in the night. Right now, rulings regarding الشهادة, يعني شهادة الهلال or رؤية الهلال, seeing the moon on the 30th night. When it comes to seeing the moon for Ramadan on the 30th night of Sha'ban, تقبل شهادة عدل مكلف واحد ظاهرا وباطن. It's sufficient for a single person to testify that they have seen the moon for the entering of the month of Sha'ban. It only requires the witness of a single person, with the condition that this person has to be adl. It has to be someone who is just and upright in their religiosity. And this has to be a person who is adl ظاهرا وباطنا. Yani it's a person who is known, people know who he is, and they've had experiences with him, and they know that this person is someone who is adl, someone who is righteous. And it has to be a person who is mukallaf, meaning they have to be aqil, they have to have intellect, and they have to be baligh, they have to have reached puberty. And this is, it's sufficient for it to be a single female. There's no difference between male or female here. And also, there's no difference between the person being a abd, a slave, or being hur. So the ones which this is not accepted from are a sabi, a child, because they're not baligh, and a majnoon, person who is not mentally well, who is crazy because they don't have aql, and mastur al-hal, a person whose adala is not known. We don't know whether that person is a person who is trustworthy. Someone who is mastur al-hal, the shahada is also not accepted in this. And so when this single adl mukallaf gives the shahada for having seen the moon on the night before Ramadan, تثبت بها جميع الأحكام المتعلقة برمضان. All of the rulings which relate to Ramadan become applied by this testimony. So that includes rulings regarding fasting, regarding tarawih, and also rulings regarding, for example, talaq and duyun and so on. If a person said to his wife, طلقتك أو طلقتك عفوا إذا جاء رمضان. When Ramadan comes, I have divorced you. So here, this single testimony would be sufficient for the month to have ended. Therefore, the talaq would occur. And these rulings, meaning the acceptance of the testimony of a single person, this is only for the month of Ramadan. As for other months, whether it's Shawwal or Sha'ban or any other month, it requires shahadatu rajulaini adlain. For every other month other than Ramadan, it requires the testimony of two righteous, two trustworthy men. So they have to be men, not females, in other than Ramadan, and they have to be two. So a single person's is not accepted in other months. And here when we say for the month of Ramadan we need the testimony of a single person, لا يشترط التصريح بلفظ الشهادة. It's not required for them to say it's a testimony. It doesn't have to be in the form of a testimony, in the words of a shahada. Rather, يكفي فيه الإخبار. It's sufficient for them to inform that they saw it. Even if they don't testify, rather they merely inform. They say, I saw the moon. This informing is sufficient when it comes to the entering of the month of Ramadan. Not for the other months. As for the other months, when we require the testimony of two men, two trustworthy men, there it has to be a testimony, a shahada. As for here, for the entering of Ramadan, it does not have to be a testimony, rather it's sufficient for the person to just inform of their seeing of the moon. Another ruling is that لا يختص ثبوته بحكم الحاكم. It's not required for this informing or this testimony to be accepted by the ruler, by the hakim, or by a judge. Rather, whoever hears it from them and they believe this person to be adl, to be trustworthy, they have to act upon that ikhbar, that informing. So it's not required for it to be something which has been testified in court or in front of a ruler, or even for the ruler to accept it. As for if the ruler rejects it, then there's tafsil, which I will get to after, inshallah. And now another very important issue, which is quite controversial as well. Is it sufficient for the moon to be spotted in a single country for the ruling to apply to everyone in the whole world, or does it have to be country by country? There's three common or three most popular opinions. The first opinion is that it's from country to country or from land to land, that every land has its own matli or matla. The second opinion, which is the opinion of the Hanabila, is that if the moon is seen anywhere on earth, then the ruling of fasting and the rulings of Ramadan apply to everyone, regardless of where they are. So for example, if a person was to see the moon in China, then everyone in Europe and Americas and Asia and Africa would all be required to fast. That's the position of the madhab. And the third opinion is that it's based on what the hakim of that country says. If the hakim of the country goes by from land to land, then it's acted upon. And if the hakim of the country says that it's based on the whole world, then that's acted upon. That's the third opinion. But as I said, the madhab is that it's based on the whole world has a single ruling. If إذا ثبتت الرؤية ببلد لزم الصوم الناس كافة. Everyone is required to fast if the moon has been spotted anywhere on earth. Now, rulings regarding the looking or the tara'i of the hilal, searching for the moon on the night of after 29 days of Sha'ban and the night of the 30th. The first ruling is that tara'i al-hilal mustahab, searching for this moon, it is something which is recommended for a person to search for it. And if they see the moon, then it's recommended to make dua when they see it, and there are ad'iyah warida fi dhalik. There are narrations which have been narrated of specific dua to make when the moon has been seen. Now, if the moon is not seen, إذا لم يرى الهلال ليلة 30 مع صحو, if the moon is not seen on the night of the 30th of Sha'ban and the sky is clear, this is a very important condition, the sky has to be clear, no clouds, no fog, then here the next day is considered 30th of Sha'ban. So they're going to complete Sha'ban 30 days. وَأَصْبَحُوا مُفْطِرِينَ, they don't fast the next day. The next day would not be fasted. And this next day, which is the 30th of Sha'ban, in the case when the previous night had a clear sky, it is disliked to fast this day. يُكْرَهُ صَوْمُهُ وَهُوَ يَوْمُ الشَّكْ عَلى الْمَذْهَبِ. يَوْمُ الشَّكْ, as is mentioned in the hadith of Ammar ibn Yasir, it is understood according to the madhab to be the day of the 30th of Sha'ban, when the previous night was clear and the moon was not spotted. The night was clear and was not spotted, then here this is considered Yawm al-Shak. And it is disliked to fast. It's disliked to fast for a fast which is tatawwur. As for fasting a obligatory fast such as qada, then that's obligatory. If they still have days to make up for Ramadan, they have to make up here. Or if they had, for example, Sawm nadhr, if they had taken an oath to fast this day, then they would be also obligated to fast it based on it being a nadhr. And also, if it in wafaq aada, if it occurs on a day which the person normally fasts, such as if they fast every Monday and Thursday, and this happens to be a Monday, so here then it would also be permissible to fast, and it would not be disliked. Now, the next ruling, وإن حال دون منظره مانع للرؤية ليلة 30 كالغيم والقطر ونحوهما وجب صوم اليوم التالي بنية رمضان احتياطا وتصلى التراويح. Now, this is a very, very important issue, and it is the ruling regarding صوم يوم الغيم, which is after the 29 days of Sha'ban, on the night of the 30th of Sha'ban. If the moon is not seen due to clouds or fog or some other preventative from seeing the moon, something in the sky which makes it not possible to see the moon. So here, what's the ruling about fasting the next day? According to the madhab, the next day is obligatory to fast with the intention of Ramadan. They say here, because the next day it's possible for it to be both Ramadan and not Ramadan, they say here, it's obligatory to fast the next day, ihtiyatan, to be safe, and the person has to intend that they are fasting Ramadan. Hukman dhanniyan. It's not a hukm which is qat'i, but it's hukm which is dhanni. And this masala is a very controversial one, where there has been a lot of akhd wa rad, back and forth between the ulama on this issue, with the Hanabila on one side saying that it's obligatory, and the Jumhur saying it's not obligatory, مع الخلاف بينهم, despite the Jumhur having differences of opinion between themselves. What's the ruling? Is it recommended to fast? Is it disliked? Is it mubah? And so on. But the madhab is that it is obligatory, and the madhab has many, many evidences for this. To list a few, just so that a person can have itmitnan, they can feel comfortable knowing that the madhab doesn't base such rulings without knowledge, rather that's based on a plethora of evidences from the Sahaba who used to fast this day and command to fast it. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he used to fast this day, and Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he used to fast this day, and Abu Hurairah also, I said Abu Hurairah, and Asma bint Abi Bakr, she used to fast this day and command people to also fast it. And it's also narrated from Ali and Umar radiallahu anhu, and other than them. though some of those might be differed upon. As for the three which I mentioned, Abu Hurairah and Ibn Umar and Asma, then that is known for certain. And Abdullah ibn Umar was the one who narrated the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْهِلَالَ فَصُومُوا وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَأَفْطِرُوا فَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ فَقْدُرُوا لَهُ. The one who narrated this hadith is Ibn Umar. And his understanding of the hadith, which is shown by his action, is that he would fast this day. As for the different narrations of the wordings of this hadith has been narrated from Ibn Abbas with a different wording, Abu Hurairah with a different wording, and so on. There's a long discussion about it. Some of those wordings are muttarib, such as the wordings of Ibn Abbas, and some of them have some additions which are shadha, such as the one which says Fatimmu Sha'ban 30. That wording is shadh. And as mentioned by Abu Bakr al-Ismaili, even though that specific narration is also mentioned by al-Bukhari, but it is shadh. And the ones which say Fakmilu Idda and so on, those are referring to completing Ramadan, because here فَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ, the hadith doesn't explicitly mention whether this ghaim, whether this cloudiness occurred in the beginning of Ramadan or at the end of Ramadan. And there are wordings of the hadith which show that this is referring to the end of Ramadan, which says فَأَتِمُّ الْعِدَّةَ ثُمَّ أَفْطِرُوا, complete the days, then break your fast, suggesting that that hadith is referring to the end of Ramadan, not to the beginning of Ramadan. In any case, this is a long topic, and there have been many books written on this issue, back and forths, and it's one which is beneficial if a person can go back to reading them. Carrying on, after that, we mentioned the ruling of fasting Yawm al-Ghaim, and we also said that here the ruling is for the fasting, that it has to be fasted with the intention of Ramadan, ihtiyatan. And also the ruling applies here for Salat Tarawih. Tarawih would also be prayed on this night. So all of the rulings, al-muta'alliqa bis-sawm, all of the rulings which relate to fasting apply in this case, such as the hukum of al-imsak, hukum of kafara, hukum of Tarawih, and so on. As for the rulings relating to other than, which don't relate to fasting, like hulul ajal, wa talaq, wa litq, wa nahwiha, then those don't apply. The rulings which relate to the entering of the month of Ramadan itself and not to the fasting, then those don't apply with this ruling. Only the rulings which have a connection to do with fasting are the ones which apply in the case of al-ghaib, when the moon is not seen due to cloudiness. Now, the last section, or the last part of the first section regarding the month of Ramadan, it is the rulings regarding Salat Tarawih. So briefly going over some of the rulings. Salat Tarawih is Sunnah Muakkada. It is a Sunnah which is emphasized, and it's Tusalla fi Ramadan, it is prayed in Ramadan. Its time is from Isha to Fajr, and specifically it's prayed after the Sunnah of Isha, after 2 rak'ah, Sunnah Rawatib, and it's prayed before Witr. Though it's permissible to pray it after Witr as well, and it's also permissible to pray it before the 2 rak'ah of Sunnah of Isha. And its amount is 20 rakat, as is the opinion of the majority of ulama and the action of the Sahaba, and there's ijma' sukuti on that. وَلَا يُنْقَصْ مِنْهَا, on the madhab, it is not, or it is, you could say it's disliked to pray less than 20 rakat in Tarawih. And if a person prays less than 20 rakat, would it count as Tarawih or only Qiyamul Layl? That's something يحتاج بحثا, though the ظاهر of iqna', and also I believe it's in al-furu', and other than that, is that if the person prays less than 20 rakat, this would be counted as Qiyamul Layl and not necessarily counted as Tarawih. Wallahu a'lam. And it's recommended to pray Tarawih in Jama'ah in the masjid, though it can be prayed by the person can pray themselves alone. And it's recommended for the Imam to read Jahran, to read out loud in the Salah. And Tarawih is prayed in pairs of 2 rakat, 2, up to 20. ويستحب أن يستريح بعد كل 4 بجلسة يسيرة. It's recommended for the person to rest after every 4 rakat. So they pray 4, then they rest for a short sitting, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and so on. Then they pray another 4, and after that they sit again, rest a bit, and so on. And that's where the name Tarawih comes from. And after, also between prayers of Tarawih, between the pairs of rakat, it's disliked to pray sunan or to pray nawafil between it. Rather, when the person starts praying tarawih, they don't pray anything in between, rather they stick until they finish praying tarawih. As for doing tawaf in between, then this is not disliked, rather it's permissible. And after praying 20 rakat of tarawih, it's recommended to pray witr in jama'ah, 3 rakat. And also the imam does al-qunut in it, as is the madhab when it comes to every witr salah. And يستحب أن لا ينقص عن ختمة في شهر. It's recommended that the jama'ah completes the Quran at least once in the month of Ramadan. It's recommended to not read less than 1 whole khatma of the Quran in Taraweeh. And when starting the Taraweeh on the first night, the first rak'ah of Taraweeh, it's recommended to start the recitation with Surah Al-Alaq. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. This surah. Then after the Imam reads this surah and does sujood tilawah, then gets up, then he starts with Surah Al-Baqarah after that. And in the last rak'ah of Ramadan, of Taraweeh, from the last day of Ramadan, it's recommended to finish the khatma of the Quran on that day, on that night, and to then make dua al-khatma, which is done before the ruku', and the Imam raises his hands and makes dua, and makes it a long dua. As for completing the Quran more than once in Ramadan, this is not recommended, but it is permissible. And it would only be recommended if the jama'ah wants the imam to read more than one khatma, then in such case it would be permissible. Now, the second section, the rulings regarding fasting specifically now, and the first of that which be the rulings regarding shurut al-sawm, the conditions for the validity of fasting. So, before we mention the shurut, first we mentioned fardu sawm. What is the obligation in siyam? Fardu sawm هو الإمساك عن جميع المفطرات من طلوع الفجر الثاني إلى كمال غروب قرص الشمس. It is الإمساك, to withhold, عن جميع المفطرات, from all of the things which break one's fast, from the beginning, from the first يعني طلوع, rising of fajr, of the fajr الثاني, يعني the real fajr, not the fajr كاذب, إلى كمال غروب قرص الشمس, until the sun has set completely and the sun is completely below the horizon. That is the time which a person has to fast, and that's what fasting is. It is al-imsak an al-muftirat. The conditions for wujub al-sawm, yani when is a person obligated to fast? There are 4 conditions. The first condition is dukhul waqt al-wujub, for the time of the obligation to enter. So a person is not obligated to fast before the time has entered. What is the time of obligation? It is من طلوع الفجر الثاني من جميع شهر رمضان من كل يوم منذور في صوم نذر. As for when it comes to fasting, the fasting of Ramadan, the time of obligation, it is from the beginning of Fajr every single day in Ramadan. So every single day it has an individual, a specific ruling by itself, an independent ruling for each day of Ramadan, as will come also later inshallah when we speak about the ruling of an-niyyah. So that's for Sawm Ramadan. As for Sawm Nadhrin, fasting which is obligated by a person's oath, then the time for it is من طلوع الفجر من اليوم المنذور. It is the person has to fast from when Fajr starts, from the day which they had taken an oath to fast. Now, some rulings regarding the waqt of Siyam, where the different situations could occur, where the person might not know, has Ramadan entered, has it not entered? So some of these rulings I'll now discuss inshallah. The first ruling is, if the people fasted by the testimony of 2 people, meaning when Ramadan entered, it wasn't just a single person who testified, rather it was 2 people who testified that they had seen the moon, then in such a case, if that's how Ramadan started, and they complete 30 days, فَلَمْ يَرَوْا الْهِلَالِ, then after 30 days, they still haven't seen the moon, then here, أَفْطَرُوا مُطْلَقًا, they all break their fast. Because here, the ruling is that Ramadan has definitely ended يعني باليقين أو بغلبة الظن الذي حكمه كاليقين. When Ramadan entered by the testimony of two people. Then when 30 days of Ramadan are finished, then Ramadan has ended by certainty, and the next day would be Yawm al-Eid, the first day of Shawwal. As for if they fasted in the beginning of the month by the testimony of a single person only a single person testified in the beginning of the month that they saw the moon, not two people, then in such a case, they don't break their fast after 30 days. Because it's possible that person made a mistake when they said that they saw the moon, when they might have lied. So in such a case, after 30 days are finished, they don't break their fast, rather they will fast the next day as well, the 31st day, to be certain that they have fasted all of Ramadan. That's if only a single person testified in the beginning of the month that they saw the moon. Likewise, similar to that is if they started fasting Ramadan in Yawm al-Ghaym, on the day when the previous night was cloudy and they couldn't see the moon because of the clouds, then in such a case also, when 30 days are finished, they don't break their fasts. Rather, they would fast the next day, the 31st day, as well, to be certain that they fasted all of Ramadan. And then the day after that, the 32nd day, would be considered to be the first day of Shawwal, meaning the day of Eid. As for in the case, in صاموا 28 ثم رأوا الهلال, if they were to fast 28 days, meaning they began the month late by accident, they missed a day, and they ended up only fasting 28 days, then they saw the moon on the night of the 29th day. So here, they would be obligated to make up one day only. وَجَبَ قَضَاءُ يَوْمٍ وَاحِدٍ فَقط. They only have to make up a single day, not 2 days, because the asl is that a month is 29. As for the 30th day, then that's not necessarily the asl, according to the madhab. So they have to make up one day to be sure that they've completed 29 days. Now, if a person sees the moon themselves, they themselves saw the moon, then in their ruling, as it applies to them, all of the rulings of Ramadan apply to them straight away. If they themselves saw the moon, even if their shahada, if their testimony was to be rejected. Meaning, for example, they saw the moon, then they went to testify that they saw the moon, but they said that you're not adl. We don't trust you. Your testimony is rejected. Other people are not going to fast because they don't consider him to be adl. But this person has to fast themselves because they know for sure that Ramadan has entered since they saw the moon. As for when it comes to breaking the fast, they don't break the fast by themselves. Meaning if they see the moon on the 30th night and the testimony is rejected because they're not adl, or there wasn't two people, there was only one person. So then we need two people for the month of Ramadan to end. Then they don't break their fast. Rather, they'll continue to fast and then they'll break their fast with everyone else. So when it comes to iftar, when it comes to the end of Ramadan, the person doesn't break their fast by merely seeing the moon themselves. Rather, they have to have the testimony of two people, them seeing the moon and someone else. And then when those two testimonies are accepted, then everyone breaks their fast. They break their fast with them. As for if they see it by themselves only, then they don't break the fast. Rather, يعني لا يفطر إلا مع الناس, breaks the fast with everyone else. Likewise, يعني if a person, so the same ruling applies whether they saw the moon and their testimony was rejected at the end of Ramadan. And likewise, if in the beginning of Ramadan they saw the moon and their testimony wasn't accepted, so then they finished 30 days, here they would have to fast the 31st day with everyone else, not breaking it by themselves. Even though they know for certain that they fasted 30 days and they saw the moon in the beginning. But when it comes to al-fitr, it has to be done with the jama'ah. Now, this ruling doesn't apply for a person who is al-munfarid, al-ba'id and al-buldan, a person who's living by themselves. They're far away from any civilization, they're not living among people. Then in such a case, the person doesn't have to have the testimony of two people, nor do they have to wait for everyone else to break the fast. Rather, they fast by themselves when they see the moon, and they break their fast by themselves also when they see the moon. Now, if two people both testified for seeing the moon, and one of them trusts the other, both trust each other, and both consider each other adl, then those two people can break their fast. Because here we have the testimony of two people. Even if they didn't go to testify at a court, or they didn't go to the hakim to testify. Rather, if this person saw and another person saw, and they trust each other, meaning they accept each other's testimony, then these two people can break their fasts. Because the ruling has been sufficed. As for if the hakim rejects, so the previous mas'ala was about them not going to testify, rather them just seeing it by themselves and not having gone to testify. As for the case when they go to testify, or one of them goes to testify, and then the testimony is rejected. If the testimony was rejected by the ruler, by the hakim, because the hakim doesn't know them, they don't know the adala, the mastur, yani majhul al-hal. No one, the hakim doesn't know whether this person is trustworthy or not. Then the rejection of the hakim for their testimony does not mean that no one else can accept it. Rather, whoever knows that person is trustworthy, and they believe that, then they can act upon the testimony. Because here they have yani mazid al-ilm, they have knowledge which that hakim didn't have. As for if the testimony was rejected by the hakim because of them being not trustworthy, yani them being a fasiq. Now it's not the case that the hakim doesn't know them, rather the hakim knows them and says that your testimony is rejected due to fisq. Then here it's not permissible for anyone to accept their testimony and act upon it, even if they themselves believe them to be adl. When the hakim rejects the person's testimony when it comes to the month due to their fisq, then that applies to everyone, meaning no one can act upon that testimony. Now, another ruling is if a person was to be at a country or a land where two people both testified to have seen the moon, therefore the month of Ramadan entered. Then this person who was in this land and acted upon the testimony of those two people, if he was to travel to another land, and this other land which he traveled to, no one there had seen the moon. Here, he tells them of the ruling of Ramadan having entered, because as I said earlier, the ruling in the madhab is that all of the whole world has the same ruling when it comes to the entering and the ending of the month. If it's seen anywhere in the world, then it applies to everyone. Now, if he goes to that other land and they don't accept that from him, then for this person who traveled to the other country, the ruling of Ramadan applies to them individually, meaning they fast from the beginning when the people in their land started fasting, and he also breaks the fast at the end when 30 days have passed, even if the people of the second land which he went to are not breaking their fast then. It's their 29th day. This traveler, it's for him his 30th day because he started fasting based on the ru'ya which was seen in his land. But it's the 29th day for the land which he went to. Here, does he have to wait with the jama'ah for them to finish 30 days? No. Here, the person breaks their fast when they finish 30 days, even if the people in that land are still fasting another day. Now, another ruling regarding the testimony or the ru'ya of the hilal. If the moon was not seen in the months before Ramadan, yani before Ramadan in Sha'ban, if the moon of Sha'ban was not seen due to ghaym or qatar, due to clouds or fog or so on, and maybe even the month before that as well, Rajab, also the moon was not seen in it due to clouds or fog, then here, how do we know when does Ramadan start? Because it's possible that the previous month might have been 30 days and it might have been 29. Obviously here we're talking the case that the moon was not seen in the beginning of Ramadan due to clouds. Likewise, it was not seen in the beginning of Sha'ban as well due to clouds. And perhaps even before that in Rajab also, it was not seen due to clouds. So here it's possible that each month might have been 29 days. It's possible each month might have been 30 days. And it's also possible that some of them would be 29 and some of them would be 30. So what's the ruling here? The ruling is that every month is counted as 29 because that's the asl. Every month is counted naqis, 29. So Rajab would be counted as 29. Sha'ban would be counted as 29. And then, therefore, Ramadan will start after 29 plus 29. 58 days has passed from the beginning of Rajab. So here, they wouldn't, at the end of Ramadan, because we counted Rajab as 29 and Sha'ban as 29, so the people after 58 days, meaning on the 59th day, they started fasting Ramadan. Also, the moon was not seen due to clouds, so this was also relating to the ruling mentioned before about Sawm Yawm al-Ghaib. Then after that, at the end of Ramadan, do they break their fast after 30 days has finished? No. Why? Because it's possible that instead of Sha'ban being 29 days as we assumed, it might have been 30 days. Likewise, Rajab, instead of being 29 days as we assumed, it might have been 30 days. So here they can only break their fast after having fasted. In the case when we estimated Sha'ban as being only 29 days, specifically Sha'ban, forget about Rajab now. Here they would have to fast 32 days of Ramadan. Meaning they estimated the previous month, because they underestimated it and it could be longer, then they only break the fast after 32 days to make up for the possibility that that the previous months were 30, not 29. And it's not possible for more than 4 months to be 29 days in a row. The maximum is for 29 days to occur 4 months in a row. So it's not estimated. So this ruling applied now, it would only apply for up to 4 months, including Ramadan. As for the 5th month, the 4th month before Ramadan, that would not, this would not apply to it. Rather, it can only occur for 4 months in a row. Now, some of these rulings might be a bit difficult. They're mentioned in mutawalat of the madhab. Some are mentioned in Rawd and some are mentioned in Muntaha and Al-Iqna. In any case, if some of these rulings you don't necessarily understand the first case, they might not be too relevant. But it's important to focus on the most important rulings, which I mentioned. Now, if a person is in a case where they cannot see the moon due to there being a barrier, something blocking them, something stopping them from seeing it, such as them being imprisoned, or, for example, there's a mountain between them, if they're in a place where the sky cannot be seen because there's a mountain between them, or if they're imprisoned and so on, then the ruling here is also the ruling which we mentioned before, when the sky is cloudy. So take the same ruling, meaning they would fast after 29 days of Sha'ban and assume the next day is Ramadan. And also the same ruling applies about assuming that every month is naqis, is deficient, 29 instead of 30, for up to 4 months. And a person who is in such a case, such as a masjoon, a person who is imprisoned, and the months become mixed up on them. They don't know, is it the month now Ramadan, is it Sha'ban, is it Shawwal? So here, what do they have to do? They have to do tahari. They have to try their best to find which month it is, to guess which month it is, yani wujuban. Then they fast based on that assumption, when they have assumed that Ramadan has entered, based on the estimation. So if they fast in such a case, when they had no idea which month it is, and they couldn't know, so they fast based on the estimates or the assumption. If later they find out that their fast occurred during Ramadan, then that's clear, that's fine. If they also find out that it occurred after Ramadan, this is also fine, because it will be counted as qada. And if they just don't know at all whether the fasting occurred in Ramadan or after Ramadan, for example, they remain in prison for the rest of their life. So then here, when there's shak, then the ruling is also that the fasting is valid. As for in the case when they know for certain that this fasting, which they did based on their estimate, occurred before Ramadan, not during it or after, rather before, then here they have to make it up. They have to make up those days which occurred before Ramadan. Likewise, they would have to make up any days which occurred on Yawm al-Nahr, on Eid day, because obviously it's not permissible to fast on Eid of the Eids. And also they would have to make up any fasting which occurred in Ayyam al-Tashriq, the 3 days after Eid al-Adha. Now, that was all relating to the first condition for the validity of Siyam, which was dukhul waqt al-wujub. Now, going on to the second condition, and the rest of the masail, inshallah, won't be as complicated as what preceded, inshallah. So, I hope to be able to finish the rest in quicker speed. The second condition for the obligation of Siyam, it is al-Islam, meaning a person who is not a Muslim is not obligated to fast. A kafir is not obligated to fast. This is relating to the hukum of the dunya, As for in the akhirah, they would be punished for it. But in the dunya, they're not obligated or forced to fast. Likewise, the murtad is not required to fast when it comes to the ruling of the dunya. Meaning that يعني لا يطالب بالقضاء. They're not required to make up those days after. If the kafir becomes Muslim, they're not required to make up fasting which they missed when they were kafir. Likewise, a person who became a murtad, who left Islam, then came back to Islam, they would not be required to make up the fasts which they missed during the ridda, during the apostasy. But they would be required to make up fasts which they missed before the apostasy. When they were still Muslim, if they missed fasts, then they would be required to make those up after returning to Islam, not the ones which they missed during the time of the apostasy. Now, if a kafir becomes a Muslim during the day, in the middle of the day in Ramadan, which they were supposed to be fasting, if they were Muslim. Here, this day, which they became Muslim in, they would have to make up this day, the one which they became a Muslim in, the middle. And they would have to fast the remaining of Ramadan. As for what proceeded from the beginning of Ramadan, when they were still a kafir, they don't have to make it up. Or they only have to make up the day that they became Muslim in, and they have to fast the days which come after that. That's the ruling when they become a Muslim in the middle of the day. And as for the ruling of al-imsak, we'll mention that later, that they are not allowed to eat or drink for the remaining of that day. The third condition for the validity of siyam, it is at-taklif, for the obligation of siyam, for fasting to be obligated. It is at-taklif, meaning the person has to have aql, they have to be aql, so a majnoon is not required to fast, and also they have to be baligh, they have to have reached puberty. So a person who is a sabi, who is a child, who has not reached puberty, is not obligated to fast. And al-majnoon, a person who doesn't have aql, they are not obligated to fast, nor are they obligated to make up days which they missed during the time of the junoon, of the insanity. But they have to make up fasts which they missed before their insanity. So a person, they had intellect and they missed days of Ramadan, then after they became insane, then after their insanity they had an intellect again, they returned to their rushd. Here they have to make up the days which they missed before their insanity, not the ones which they missed during their insanity, just as we mentioned also about the murtad. And also, like the kafir as well, a person who is insane, if they become aqil in the middle of the day, they return to their senses. Here they have to, here there's two situations. The first situation is if they had intended to fast in the previous night. Obviously, the intention of a majnoon is not valid, but if they were sane at night time, so at night time they had intellect, then during the night at some point, they became insane. And this continued up until the daytime of the fasting of Ramadan. And then in the middle of the day, they returned to their senses. Here, they continue with the fasting, because the fasting is valid since they had the intention during the night. If they didn't have intention during the night, like they were insane during the night as well, or they weren't insane but they just didn't make intention, then in such a case, the day in which the majnoon returns to his aql, they have to make up that day, like we mentioned about the kafir as well. As for the sabi, the child, we mentioned the child, it is not obligated to fast even if they are murahiq, yani a preteen, as long as they have not reached puberty. But is it valid from a child to fast? It's valid for a mumayyiz to fast. A child who has reached the age of 7, has completed 7 years and has started the 8th year, of course, going by Hijri calendar. This child can fast and their fasting is valid and they are rewarded for it, but they're not obligated to fast. As for the guardian, the wali of the child who is mumayyiz, if this child is mumayyiz, meaning they have reached 7 years, they have finished 7 years and they're on the 8th year, and they also have al-qudra, yani mutiq lis-sawm, they have the ability to fast, then their father, their wali, is obligated to command them to fast, to make them fast, even though they're not obligated shar'an. But this is to yani ta'weed, to make them trained to fast. So the father is the one who is commanded here, who is being told by the Sharia to tell their child to fast and to also hit them if they refuse to do so. And now, if a person was a child and they were fasting, then during that day, they became an adult. They reached puberty during this day. Obviously now, the signs for puberty for male are 3. First sign is completing 15 years, meaning they have completed 15, they are 15 years old. That's the first sign. The second sign is ejaculation, the ejaculation of semen. And the third sign is to have coarse pubic hair, شعر العانة, the one which is around the private parts. Coarse pubic hair is the third sign of puberty. There's a fourth sign which is specific for females, which is al-hayd, which is menstruation. Now, if a person was a child and they were fasting, they had already made their intention in the night, and they were fasting as a nafil fasting, then during that day they reached puberty. For example, it was their 15th birthday. On this specific day at 3 o'clock, for example, they became 15 years old according to the Hijri calendar. Here they now became a baligh, they became an adult during the day. Then here they complete their sawm. أتم صومه ولا قضى عليه. They can continue in their fasting, and they are not obligated to make up this day since they are already fasting and their fasting is valid. That was an example if they became an adult by reaching 15 years. It's also possible that they became an adult through ejaculation, through al-ihtilam, a wet dream, because wet dreams don't break your fast. So if they ejaculated semen in a way which doesn't break the fast, such as through a wet dream, and they knew by that they had reached puberty, then if they were fasting, they can continue in the fast and they don't have to make it up. As for if they reached puberty during the day through the third sign, which was the sign of sha'r al-ana, the coarse pubic hair, then here they have to make up the day. They have to make up the day even if they were fasting. Why? Because this sign specifically, sha'r al-ana, it is not one which is specific. You can't tell the exact time when this occurs. It's something which is more ambiguous. So then they would have to make up that day which they reach puberty in due to the sign. And obviously they would have to then fast the remaining of Ramadan. They wouldn't have to fast that which is before them, before they reach puberty, since they were only a child and were not obligated to fast. Now, and as for the fourth sign, which is the sign for a female of menstruation, then obviously menstruation, as will come, is from mufsidat sawm. It's something which breaks the sawm anyway. So if the female menstruates in the middle of the day, then obviously she would have to make up that day, because it's not valid for her to continue fasting when she is on her menses. Now, if a child knows that they are going to reach puberty the next day, for example, they know that tomorrow is their 15th birthday and they're going to reach puberty during the day time of the next day, are they obligated to fast from the night? Are they obligated to make their niyyah to fast the next day? No. Why? Because they're still not mukallaf. They haven't become mukallaf yet, so they are not obligated to fast, even if they know that they will become mukallaf during the day, during the upcoming day. Now, the fourth and final sign for the obligation of siyam, it is al-qudrah. The person has to be capable to fast. So a person who is ajiz an siyam, a person who is not able to fast at all, such as a person who is kabir sin, someone who is very old, or if they have a marad, la yurja bur'uhu, if they are terminally ill, meaning they will not become healthy and they can't fast, or if they have shabaq da'im. And shabaq is a sort of illness which we'll speak about later, when the person, if they don't ejaculate, if they don't, then they could يتشقق فرجه, that the private parts would, as the fuqaha say, literally split in half. Then this is a marad. If the person has such a marad which is permanent, they have to akramakumullah has to ejaculate regularly, then this would also take the ruling as a marad which is daim. So the ruling for such groups who cannot fast at all is that they are not obligated to fast, nor are they obligated to make it up. Rather, they are obligated to do it'am, to give fidyah, to feed a single miskin, poor person, for each day. And the it'am, we'll speak about how it's done later. So here the ruling is for the one who is unable to fast at all. And this is different to the one who is able to fast but has an udhr, has an excuse, such as al-musafir, the traveler, or a person who is marid, المريض المرجوب برؤه, the one who is sick, but it's not a terminal illness, rather it's hoped that they will become healthy after a while. And likewise, al-hayd wal-nufasa, the woman who is in her menstruation or post-birth bleeding, and al-mughma alayhi, a person who is unconscious, and a person who has shabaq, which is not permanent, rather temporary. Then the ruling for all of these people is that they are obligated to fast. The obligation of fasting applies to them, but it's thabit fi dhimmamihim, meaning they don't have to fast now due to the excuse, rather they are required to fast at a later time through qada, through making up these days. So therefore, since they are obligated to fast, they can't give fidya, they can't feed poor people instead, rather they have to fast, but this fasting is at a later time when their udhr is no longer present. 1 second, sorry. Now, those were the four conditions for the obligation of siyam. Now we have 5 conditions for the sihha, for the validity of siyam. Fasting is only valid when 5 conditions are present. The first condition is al-waqt al-qabil lis-sawm. The fasting has to occur at a valid time. The person can't just fast it whenever they want, rather it has to be at a specific time. And this time is from min tulu' al-fajr ila ghurub al-shams. As mentioned earlier, it has to be from beginning of Fajr till the end of the day, until the sun has completely set. So a person cannot fast at a different time. They cannot fast during the night. Fasting only occurs at this specific time of the day. And also it cannot be the 2 days of Eid. يوم العيد يحرم صومهما. It's impermissible to fast by ijma' the 2 days of Eid. So the person cannot fast those neither as a fard fasting, such as nadr or qada or kafara, nor can they fast it as a nafil, as a supererogatory fasting. And likewise, similar to the days of Eid, is also ayyam al-tashriq, the 3 days after Eid al-Adha. The person is also not permitted to fast those days, and that fasting is not valid, except for the case of dam al-mut'a wa qiran, a person who does hajj, tamattu' or al-qiran, then they are required to give a hadi. If they do not have a hadi, if they cannot slaughter an animal, then they would fast 10 days. Those 10 days, 3 of them can be during ayyam al-tashriq. So it's permissible for them to fast in that specific case only. The second condition for the validity of fasting is al-Islam. So obviously, fasting is not valid from a kafir, and then that would include a murtad. The third condition is al-aqlu wa tamyiz, or you could consider this 2 conditions. Al-aql, therefore, a majnoon, person who is not, who is insane, cannot fast, and their fasting is not valid. And likewise, we said at-tamyiz, meaning a child who has not reached 7 years, they cannot fast, and their fasting is not valid. As for if they have completed 7 years, then in such a case, their fasting is valid, but they're not obligated to do so. Now, we said that the majnoon cannot fast. Their fasting is not valid. If the person was majnoon for most of the day, but during a part of the day, they had intellect, here the fasting is valid. So the condition for validity is not for the person to have aql for the whole day, rather it's for them to have aql at least for a part of the day. So the person started their fasting whilst having aql, then during the middle of the day they lost the aql, the fast is still valid. Obviously with the condition that they had to have niyyah and intention from the previous night. As for al-mughma alayh, the person who is unconscious, then that's the same as the ruling for the majnoon, meaning if they were unconscious for the whole day, from the beginning of the day until the end, then this fasting is not valid. But if they were unconscious for a part of the day only, then their fast is valid. They don't have to make it up. As for sleeping the whole day, then even if the person sleeps the whole day, from Fajr all the way till Maghrib, obviously this is not permissible because they would be missing their salawat, but the fast would be valid. So sleeping is obviously not as heavy as being unconscious or being insane. So therefore, the fasting is valid from a person who is sleeping, even if they sleep the whole day. The fourth condition for the validity of siyam, it is inqita'u dami haydin wa nifas, that the blood, that the menstruation has to stop, and also nifas, post-birth bleeding, has to also stop. So if a woman is bleeding from menstruation or nifas, then they cannot fast. Rather, fasting is obligatory upon them. it is haram upon them. It is haram for them to fast during their hayd or nifas, and it would not be valid. But they are still obligated to make it up, meaning it stops hayd or nifas. It stops the validity of siyam, but it does not stop the obligation. Rather, the obligation still applies, but at a later time. And this is different to salah. As for salah, a woman who is on her hayd or nifas doesn't have to pray those missed salawat, neither during the hayd nor after. But in fasting, the woman has to make up the fasts. The fifth and final condition, and the most detailed of them all, is the shart of an-niyyah. The person has to have intention when they are fasting. So this means that the person has to do ta'yin an-niyyah. They have to specify the intention that they are fasting. And this ta'yin an-niyyah, it has to occur from the previous night. Meaning, when it comes to siyam, fard, obligatory fasting, the person has to have intended from the night time. It's not valid for them to intend during the day. Rather, they had to have intention during the night, the previous night, to fast the upcoming day. And this intention has to be specific. They have to have ta'yin, meaning they have to specify, are they fasting Ramadan? Are they fasting a day from Ramadan? Are they fasting nafil? Are they fasting kaffara, expiation? Are they fasting qada, missing days which they have missed? Or are they fasting nadhr, a fasting which they had taken oath to fast? So they have to specify what their intention is when they are fasting. Do they have to specify that if they say that they're fasting, if their intention is to fast Ramadan, do they have to also add to that they're fasting Ramadan fardan as an obligation? No, that's not a condition. Rather, specifying that it's Ramadan is sufficient, because obviously fasting Ramadan is obligatory when the conditions are met. Now, if a person is not certain of their intention, if they don't have jazm, then it's not valid. For example, if they said, if they conditioned their intention, if they did ta'liq al-niyyah, then the niyyah is not valid. For example, they said, in kana ghadan Ramadan, fana sa'im, wa illa fana muftir. For example, on the 30th night of Sha'ban, if they said, if tomorrow is Ramadan, then I'm fasting. And if it's not Ramadan, then I'm not going to fast. Is this intention valid? No. Meaning the next day, even if they want to fast, their fasting would not be valid. Whether it ends up being Ramadan or not. Because the intention here was mu'allaq, it was conditioned. And intention has to be majzoom bih, or majzoom biha, has to be certain. Except there's one exception to this, which is at the end of Ramadan, after 29 days of Ramadan has passed. And if they say on the night of the 30th, if tomorrow is still Ramadan, then I'm fasting. And if it's not Ramadan, if it's Eid, then I'm not fasting. Here, this is an exception to the rule. And this shart, this ta'liq, does not invalidate the niyyah. Why? Because they're still acting upon the asl, which is baqa Ramadan. So here, if they said, in kana ghadan Ramadan, fana sa'im, wa in kana shawwal, fana muftir. This condition, if it's specifically made on the night of the 30th, it's valid. The night of the 30th of Ramadan, not 30th of Sha'ban. If their niyyah, it is mutaraddid bayna niyatayn, meaning they're not certain whether it's this fasting or another one. For example, if they said, in kana ghadan Ramadan, fahuwa fardi wa illa fanafil, this is also not valid. If they said, if tomorrow is Ramadan, then my fasting is going to be fard, Ramadan. And if tomorrow is not Ramadan, then I'm still going to fast, but the fasting is going to be nafil, then this intention is also not valid, because it is mutaraddid bayna niyatayn. So that's also not valid. The person has to be certain of what they are intending to fast. Likewise, if they were to say, in kana ghadan Ramadan, fahuwa anhu wa illa fahuwa an wajib ghayri. If they said, if tomorrow is Ramadan, then I'm going to fast Ramadan. And if it's not Ramadan, then I'm going to fast, for example, kaffara, for an expiation of something else. This is also not valid, because it is a niyyah ghayru majzuma. It is not a certain niyyah, rather, which is mutaraddid bayna ithnatayn. And so this was when it applies, when the ruling relates to fasting Ramadan. As for fasting outside of Ramadan, if it's in a different month, for example, Muharram, and they intend, or the niyyah is not certain, rather it's يعني متردد بين اثنين. They're not certain which day they're fasting. For example, they say that أنا صائم غدا قضاء أو نذر. يعني they haven't specified what they're fasting tomorrow, rather it could apply to be both qada or nadr. In such a case, this fasting would be valid, but only as nafil. It would only count as a fasting which is nafil, which is supererogatory. It would not count as a fasting which is obligatory. Therefore, it cannot be counted for qada, nor nadr, nor kafara, because these are obligatory fasts. And it would just count as siyam al-tatawwu', as supererogatory fasting. Likewise, if they combine between two intentions. Again, this is still outside of Ramadan. If it was in Ramadan, then it wouldn't count as anything. As for outside of Ramadan, if they combine between two intentions, for example, they say that tomorrow they're going to fast both qada and Arafah, Yom Arafah, Tatawwur, for example. Here, then the intention is not valid for wajib. It would only count as a nafil. So the intention which is wajib would not count. Likewise, if they can combine between two wajib things, then it would also count as nafil. If they said tomorrow I'm going to fast both qada and kafara at the same time, this intention would only count as a nafil, and it would not count as either of the obligations. As for when it comes to intending such a thing during the month of Ramadan, then this is not valid, because it's not permissible and it's not valid to fast anything during Ramadan except for that specific Ramadan. So you cannot fast during Ramadan tatawwu', yani supererogatory fast. You cannot fast during it qada of a previous Ramadan. You cannot fast during it nadhr, and you cannot fast during it kafara, as I'll mention that later on inshallah as well. In the case when it's the night of the 30th of Sha'ban, and tomorrow may be Ramadan and it may not be. If the person intends to fast Ramadan and they don't have any mustanid shara'i, they don't have any evidence to say that tomorrow is Ramadan, they're just going based on mere possibility. They say tomorrow might be Ramadan, so I intend to fast. Here, this fasting is not valid. It's not valid to intend that, because al-qasdu tabi'un lil-ilm. You can only intend something if you have knowledge of it, and here this person does not have knowledge of it. This is in the case when it doesn't have any mustanid shara'i. As for the case when it has a mustanid shara'i, yani a dalil to fast the next day, they're relying on a form of dalil, even if that dalil is, for example, wujud al-ghaym, if the case where there's clouds when we obligated fasting in such a case, sawm yawm al-ghaym, then that is a valid mustanid shara'i, so then the niyyah would be valid. If a person says, ana sa'imun insha'Allah, if they condition insha'Allah in their intention, does this invalidate it? If the person says it shakkan or mutaraddidan, then it's not valid. If they say it as doubt, meaning if Allah wills, I might fast. Here, the insha'Allah was out of shak, out of doubt, or out of taraddud, being uncertain. This invalidates the intention. As for if it's not that, if it's not for that reason, rather it's for example, the seeking barakah through the mention of inshallah, or just out of habit without intending anything specific by saying inshallah, then the niyyah is valid. The ruling for the niyyah in the madhab, and according to the jumhur of the ulama, is that every day has a separate ruling. So the person has to intend at the beginning of every single day, or in the night before every single day. So it's not sufficient for the person to intend in the beginning of Ramadan that they're going to fast the whole month and then not have to renew their intention. Rather, their intention has to be renewed every single night. So what does this mean? This means, for example, if a person was to not intend in the night, if they were to sleep before nighttime entered, before Maghrib, they started sleeping at Asr, and they only woke up after Fajr, in the middle of Ramadan, in the 15th day, for example. Here, can they fast the day? No, they cannot fast the day, because they did not intend it during the night. And we said that every single day in Ramadan has to have a separate intention done during its previous night. So here, since the person did not intend during the night, since they were asleep the whole night, here they cannot fast this day. They would rather have to make it up qada'an. That's the method. And the obligation for intention, it is that the person has to intend. Obviously, intention, it is fil qalb, yani, in the heart, meaning the person has to just merely think that they're going to, merely intend in the heart that they're going to fast. And having sahur, or eating for the sake of strengthening themselves for fasting the next day. This is sufficient to demonstrate that they had niyyah. And it doesn't matter whether the niyyah occurred in the beginning of the night or the middle or the end. It can occur at any time during the night, from the beginning of Maghrib all the way up to just before Fajr. And it also doesn't matter whether they do something which would break the fast after having intended to fast the next day. For example, at Maghrib time, they had the intention to fast the next day. Then they went on and ate after that, ate at Isha time, for example. Does this mean they have to renew their niyyah? No, they don't have to renew the niyyah, because the niyyah here is for the day and it's not for the night. So doing something which is a muftir during the night does not break the niyyah. As for also in the case, for example, if they had the niyyah during the night, then they became insane after. Do they have to renew their niyyah? They don't have to renew their niyyah. So insanity or being unconscious does not break the niyyah. But ar-ridda does. If the person apostatizes during the night, then they come back to Islam, they would have to renew their niyyah, because ridda, it invalidates all a'mal. Now, if the woman is on her menstruation and she knows that her menstruation is going to end before Fajr time, is it valid for her to make her intention to fast the next day whilst she's still on her menstruation? Yes, it's valid for her to intend that, as long as she knows that her menstruation will stop before Fajr time. And the ruling which we mentioned now for the obligation of making the intention at night, this is only for sawm fard, for obligatory fasts. As for supererogatory, nafil fasts, then it's permissible for the person to intend even during the middle of the day, even if they had not made the intention at night, but during the middle of the day, they intended to fast from then. That is valid, as long as they had not ate or drank or done anything which would invalidate the fast up until then. And in terms of reward, the reward would only be counted for them from the time that they made their intention. So for example, if they intended to fast a nafil from dhuhr time, they hadn't ate the whole day, so they said, I might as well fast this day. Here, the reward would only count from the time which they made the intention, not from the beginning of the day. Now, what's the ruling if a person breaks their niyyah, breaks the intention to fast during the middle of the day? Breaking the niyyah during the middle of the day, if the fasting is fard, then this breaks it, obviously, because the niyyah has to be done from the night. And here, the niyyah, since it was cut off, they would need to renew it, and they cannot renew it during the daytime. So therefore, they would have to make up this day, which was sawm fard, an obligatory fasting. As for in the case when it's sawm naflin, when it's a nafil, supererogatory fasting, if they cut their niyyah in the middle of the day, and then they still haven't ate or done any muftir, then they intend again, then that's valid, since the intention can be made during the day when the fasting is nafil. Now, if a person is fasting a fard, is it permissible for them to change their niyyah? Firstly, changing from fard to another fard is not valid. So for example, if they had intended to fast qada, and then in the middle of the day they said, rather I want to fast this day nadhr for another which I had made beforehand. Here this would not be valid. So qalbu niyyati wajibin ila wajib akhar la yasih. As for qalbu niyyati wajibin li nafl, then that's valid. If they change their niyyah from wajib, such as qada, to a nafl, to supererogatory fasting, then this is valid in other than Ramadan, not in the month of Ramadan, because in Ramadan a person cannot fast during the day except some Ramadan. They cannot fast any other fasting during this month. But as for outside of Ramadan, then it is valid, but it is makruh if there's no reason to do so. If there's no reason to do so, then it is makruh to do that. And it would be haram. The asl is that it's makruh, but it can be haram in the case when the time is short and it's not sufficient for them to complete the obligatory fasting. Meaning, for example, if they had one day left to make up the fast from the previous Ramadan, then here they cannot. It's haram for them to change the niyyah from fard to from wajib to nafil because the time here is restricted. Now, in the case when a kafir becomes Muslim in the middle of a day, or a woman had menstruation, then her menstruation ended in the middle of the day, or likewise, for example, a person who was a majnoon, who didn't have intellect, in the middle of the day they returned to their senses. The case for these people is if they had not done any other thing which would break their fast, such as akl wa shurb, then they can fast the remaining part of the day. They can fast it as nafil. Again, this is outside of Ramadan. In other months, they can fast the remaining part of the day, the remaining hours from the day, as nafil, as long as they had not done anything which would have broken their fast. Now, that was the second section, ended. Wallahu musta'an. Inshallah, I'm going to continue and hope to finish as much as possible in what remaining time remains. Third section, which is ahkamu ahli al-adhar, the rulings regarding those people who have an udhr, so they are not required to fast. So the first of these would be al-musafir, the rulings regarding a traveler. So a person who is traveling, safaran yubihu al-qasr, a traveling which permits them to shorten their salah, meaning the traveling has to be mubah, it cannot be makruh or muharram, and it has to reach the distance, which is 80 kilometers, or roughly around 80 kilometers. Then in such a case, if they are traveling for the whole day from before Fajr until Maghrib, if they're traveling the whole day, then it is mustahab, it is recommended for them to not fast. It's recommended for them to break their fast. And it is makruh for them to fast. It's disliked for them to fast in this case, because of the hadith, laysa min al-birri as-sawmu fi as-safar. That's the ruling if they're fasting, if they are traveling for the whole day from Fajr all the way to Maghrib. As for if they were in the beginning of the day not a traveler, if they were muqim, then in the middle of the day they started traveling. يعني نوى المقيم صوما ثم سافر في أثناء يومه. Then in this case, when they start traveling in the middle of the day, are they allowed to break their fast? Yes, they are allowed to break their fast according to the madhab, with the condition that they can only break after they have left their city. They have left the houses, the residences within their land, within their village or city. Once they have passed all of the houses, then they can from there break their fast. They cannot break their fast whilst they are still within the area of residences. As for in this case, when they started fasting, then they traveled in the middle of the day, here it's mubah for them to break their fast. It's not mustahab. In the first case, it was mustahab. Here it's only mubah. وَالصَّوْمْ أَفْضَلْ لَهُ. And in this case, completing the fasting is better for them than breaking it. And like I said, they can only break their fast once they have separated, they have passed all of the houses, all of the residences in the city. They cannot fast whilst they're still within the areas of residence. As for a safar, a traveling which does not allow a person to shorten their salah, such as a safar which is muharram, they're going, safar ma'asiyah, they're intending to go somewhere to commit sin, then they cannot shorten their salah and they cannot break their fast. Likewise, if the safar is makruh, if it is a disliked safar, an example of a disliked safar according to the method is going specifically to graves to make dua next to them. If the intention is to specifically go visit graves to make dua next to them, then this safar, it is safar makruh, it is disliked. So therefore, they would not be allowed to shorten the salah, and they would also not be allowed to break their fast. And likewise, if it's safar, duna masafat al-qasr, if it is a safar which is short, less than 80 kilometers, then this also does not permit them to break their fast. Likewise, man safara liyuftir la li gharad akhar, a person who travels with the sole intention of wanting to travel so that they can break their fast. They don't have any other purpose for traveling other than they want to travel so they don't have to fast. Here, they have to fast, and breaking it would be haram on them. And the travel itself, the safar itself, is also haram for them. Now, another ruling, and this is probably one of the most important rulings, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, although there is khilaf in it. But according to the madhab, if a person is traveling and they know that they're going to reach their destination during the middle of the day, before sunset, here they are not allowed to break their fast. They have to fast this day. So for example, if you're traveling and you know that tomorrow you're going to arrive at your destination before sunset, you're going to arrive, for example, at 4 p.m. and sunset is at 7 p.m., for example. here you are not allowed to break your fast. Rather, you have to fast from the beginning of the day if you know that you're going to reach your destination before sunset. So this is the case for most travels. Yani, if you're traveling somewhere by car, 3-4 hours, even though you might be traveling the distance which would permit breaking your fast, since you are reaching your destination before sunset, you are not allowed to break your fast. Rather, you are obligated to fast. Now, that was the first person of Ahl al-Adhar, the first person who has an excuse to break their fast. The second group is a person who is marid, a person who is sick. So, al-marid, الذي يرجى برؤه إن خاف ضررا من الصوم كزيادة مرضه أو طوله سنة له الفطر. If a person is ill, and this is an illness which is not permanent, in the case when the illness is permanent, terminal illness, as I mentioned earlier, the person would not fast at all, rather they would just feed poor people. An illness which is temporary, and this illness, if they were to fast in it, the fasting would harm them. The fasting would harm them by either making the illness last longer, or it will become more intense. And they know this by the قول طبيب مسلم ثقة, a reliable Muslim doctor has told them that if you fast this in this illness, your illness will get worse. Then here, يستحب له الفطر. It's recommended for them to break their fast. ويكره له الصوم, and it's disliked for them to fast. If they do fast, it will be valid, but it would be disliked for them to fast in this case. Likewise, a person من خاف مرضا, if a person fears that they're going to become sick if they fast. They're not sick now, but they think that if they fast, they're going to become sick. For example, if they know they might have a specific illness that if they fast and they become thirsty and dehydrated, they'll become ill or something like that. Then in such a case, this also takes the same ruling that it is recommended for them to break their fast, and it is disliked for them to fast. So what's the ruling if a person fasts in the case and they know that they're fasting, it could cause them to die? يعني يخاف منه التلف. يعني in a case where this illness is serious, and if they fast, they might possibly die from it. Here the madhab says that it's makruh for them to fast. The madhab only says that it's makruh and not haram for them to fast. And the second opinion says وَقِيلَ يُحْرَم, and the second opinion says يحرم, that it is haram. But the madhab says that in such a case, if they fear dying by fasting in their case is makruh, not muharram. Now, that was the previous, what I mentioned now was for a person who will become ill or more ill due to fasting. What if a person is able to fast, but they need to take a specific medicine, and if they don't take this medicine, then that will harm them, meaning they need to break their fast in order to take their medicine. Here, in such a case, يُبَاحُ لَهُ الْفِطْرِ. It's permissible for them to break their fasting. It's not mustahab like the previous case. Rather, here it's only mubah. It's only permissible. Other cases which have the same ruling as a person who is ill, من قاتل عدوا أو أحاط العدو ببلده. If a person is fighting in jihad, without traveling, if the jihad was to be local, for example, or if the enemies were to surround the land, attacking them, then in such a case also, يباح له الفطر. It's permissible for them to break the fast, even if they're not traveling. Likewise, من صنعته شاقة يخاف تلفا بالصوم. If a person has a job, which is very hard, very strenuous and physical, and if they fast, then they're they might die, or they might be seriously ill because of that, and they're not able to leave off this job. يضره تركه. Leaving off this job would harm them. Then in such a case, it's also permissible for them to break their fast. For example, some people, they work in open areas in the sun, and the jobs are very strenuous, and they can't leave this job because they need income. They don't have any other income, and they fear that if they fast in such a case, they might die from dehydration or become very sick. Then in such a case, it's also permissible for them to break their fast. As for the case if a person's ill, but the illness doesn't have any relation to do with fasting, meaning the illness is not going to become worse whether they fast or not, such as, for example, they have they have a wound on their hand, whether they fast or not, this is not going to affect them. Then in such a case, it is haram for them to break their fast. يعني الفطر محرم في حقي, and they're obligated to fast because the the excuse is only for that illness which has a relation to fasting by either becoming longer or worse due to fasting. Another thing which has the ruling of an illness is a shabaq, which I mentioned earlier. من به شبق يخاف تشقق فرجه جاز له الوطء للضرورة وعليه القضاء والكفارة. If a person has shabaq, which is an illness, Allahu Alam, does this illness actually exist or not? But the fuqaha mention it, so I'm assuming it does exist. In a case where if they don't have sexual intercourse, that their private parts will literally rip in half. This is an illness which the fuqaha say, يعني يباح جاز له الوطء. In this case, the person is allowed to have intercourse, even though they would be obligated to fast. So they would be permitted to have intercourse due to the shabaq, and then they would have to make up the day. So عليه القضاء ولا كفارة, and they are not obligated to give kafara in this case, even though the asl is the person who has intercourse during the day in Ramadan, in the month of Ramadan, they are obligated to give kafara as well as make up the day. But in this case, since they have an udhr, they would be obligated to make up the day, and there would be no kafara on them. Now, in اندفعت شهوته بما دون الوطء تعين, if the person is able to stop this illness, if they don't need to have intercourse, but they just need to ejaculate, and the ejaculation can occur without having to have intercourse with their wife, such as through istimna, masturbation, or through other physical contact which isn't sexual penetration, then in such a case, harum al-jima', they are not allowed to have sexual intercourse. Rather, they would use this other means for getting rid of the shabaq. Now, if the person has shabaq, where the private parts are going to literally rip in half if they don't have intercourse, and they need to do ifsad of the sawm of al-mawtu'ah, meaning their wife or their amma, if they had an amma, that they are going to have intercourse with, is also fasting. So they need to break their fast as well. Then in such a case, it is permissible due to darura, due to the necessity, and there would be no kafara neither on the male nor on the female. And the fuqaha mentioned some other ahkam here. تتعين زوجة أو أمة كتابيتان أو غير مكلفتين. If it's possible for the if he has, for example, a wife which is Muslim and another wife which is kitabi, which is a Jew or Christian, he would be obligated to not have intercourse with the Muslim wife, thereby breaking her fast as well, but rather to have it with the kitabi wife and so on. And like, for example, in the case where one is mukallafa and the other isn't غير mukallafa. Now, they also mention يقدم وطء من لزمها الإمساك على الصائمة والصائمة على الحائض. If there's, for example, if the person had 3 wives, one of them is not fasting, but they are obligated to do imsak. For example, they were sick and then they became healthy during the day. The rest of the day, they're not allowed to eat. This is ahkam al-imsak, as I'll mention later. And the second wife is fasting, and the third wife is not fasting, but she is on her menstruation. Here, يعني يقدم الممسكة, the one who the obligation goes to firstly is the one who is not fasting, rather is only doing imsak. If she's not present, then it would be the second level would be the one who is fasting, and the third level, the highest case, which is not permissible if the other 2 cases are present, is al-ha'id, the woman who is menstruating. والمريض الذي ينتفع بالجماع حكمه كحكم من به شبق. والله أعلم. After that, now the third, or we could say 4th group of people who are allowed to break their fast, who have an udhr, it is al-hamil wal-murdi'. Al-hamil, a woman who is pregnant, and al-murdi', a breastfeeding woman. So here there's cases. إن خافتا على أنفسهما أو الولد أو إن خافتا على أنفسهما أو الولد سنة لهما الفطر وكره لهما الصوم. If a woman is pregnant or breastfeeding and she fears harm on herself if she fasts due to her pregnancy or breastfeeding, or she doesn't fear harm for herself, but she fears harm for the child, then in both of these cases, it is recommended for them to break their fast, and it's makruh for them to fast. Now, in the case, متى قبل الرضيع ثدي غير أمه وقدر وليه الذي يمون عليه أن يستأجر له أو كان للرضيع من المال ما يستأجر منه فعلى من فعل ولم يبح الفطر للأم. If there's a case where a mother is breastfeeding and she is fasting, or she's obligated to fast, and the child, the baby which is being breastfed, is accepts to be breastfed by other than the mom. يعني يقبل ثدي غيرها. It's not, the child doesn't mind being breastfed by a different woman. And the wali, the guardian of the child, meaning his father, is able to pay for a witness for a woman who breastfeeds the child instead of the mother, then that's obligatory. He's obligated to rent a wet nurse who breastfeeds the child instead of the mother, so that the mother can fast. In such a case, the mother is not allowed to break her fast. And the ruling which was mentioned earlier about a woman being allowed to break her fast if she's hamil, pregnant, or if she is murdi, breastfeeding, the ruling applies whether she is breastfeeding her own child, as in she's the mom, or she is breastfeeding someone else's child, which is a woman who is a wet nurse. And in the case where the child is being breastfed by a wet nurse, by not the mother, and the wet nurse, the dhir, is fasting, and this harms the child, بنقص اللبن أو تغييره, that, for example, she won't be able to produce much breast milk, then in such a case, the father, the wali who rented out this wet nurse, he has the choice to either accept it as it is, or that he can do fasq al-ijara, to cancel the contract. If he chooses to accept the contract as it is, then in such a case, إن تأذى الرضيع بصومها لزم الحاكم إجبارها على الفطر بطلب المستأجر. In the case if he doesn't want to cancel the contract with the wet nurse, the father has the right to ask the ruler, the hakim, the qadi, the judge, to force the wet nurse to break her fast so that he doesn't harm the child. So he has the right to do that even if the woman wasn't intending to harm the child. If she intends to harm the child, then she's sinful in the first place. And if she doesn't intend to harm the child, the ruler can still force her to break her fast if the child is going to be harmed by her fasting. Another group of people who are allowed to break their fast is منقذ آدمي معصوم أو حيوان محترم, a person who needs to save a human whose blood is protected, a Muslim or a dhimmi. They need to, and this Muslim is going to die, this human is going to die if they don't save them. Or if it's a haywan muhtaram, if it's an animal which is muhtaram, and they need to save this human or this animal, and they need to break their fast in order to save them, then here they are also allowed to break the fast. In fact, they are obligated to break the fast if they cannot save the child, if they cannot save the human or the animal without breaking the fast. As for if they can save it without having to break the fast, then in such a case, breaking the fast would be haram for them. And generally, the ruling is that saving a human or an adami which is ma'asum and a haywan which is muhtaram, it is obligatory to save them from harm, such as, for example, they're going to drown or be burnt in a fire. If a person's qadir ma'al qudra, if a person is able to save them, they are obligated to save them. Whilst saving them, or after, if the person saves them and they become weak due to this, for example, they had to dive into the sea to try save someone who is drowning, and then because of saving this person, they became weak, they became physically weak or ill, then in such a case they are also allowed to break the fast, and then there's no fidya upon them. And another ruling here is also the person who is man talaba ta'ihan, person who is searching for something which is lost. A person who is lost, they're following a person who is lost, or a animal which is lost or stolen, and they're chasing this down. Then in such a case, if they need to break their fast to be able to chase it down, then they are also allowed to break their fast in that case. And all of the ones which we mentioned now, in the cases where a person is allowed to break their fast, the ruling for all of them is that if a person ليس لمن أبيح له الفطر في رمضان صوم غيره فيه كنفل أو واجب آخر. If a person had an excuse which allows them to break their fast, for example, they're a traveler in Ramadan. Here, if they break their fast, they cannot fast a different day during this time. Meaning, they can't say, since I'm a traveler, I don't have to fast Ramadan now, so I'm going to fast kathara during this day instead. No. During the month of Ramadan, if they have an order to break their fast, they cannot fast a different day during that time instead. Because as I mentioned earlier, nothing can be fasted during the month of Ramadan except for some Ramadan of that specific year. And if they were to do so, then both of their siyam would be invalid. Both the Sawm Ramadan and the other day which they intended instead, both would be invalid. Likewise, if they were to change their niyyah in the middle, when they were fasting a day of Ramadan during the day, if they were to change their niyyah from fasting Ramadan to fasting something else, then this would also be haram, and their fasting would become invalid. Final ruling, if a person has an excuse which permits them to break their fasting, such as the person is a traveler, or the ill, or so on, then here they can break their fast in any means they want, meaning they can break their fast by akl, by eating, or shurb, by drinking, or by jima', sexual intercourse, and in such a case there will be no kafara upon them, because they have an order which permits them to break their fast, so then they can break it however they will, as long as it's, of course, by a means which is halal. And if a person eats apparently and openly in the month of Ramadan, then inkar is done on them. They are blameworthy for doing so, and it's haram for them to do so, even if they have an udhr, meaning they might be a traveler, and they might be going somewhere where they're a traveler, and they're eating publicly. This is haram for them to do so, even if they are allowed to break their fast. They're only allowed to eat privately, not publicly. That's the mu'tamad of the madhab. And the second opinion is that if the udhr is clear, if the excuse is something which can physically, obviously be seen, and for example, they're obviously a traveler, or they're obviously sick, then in such a case they can eat publicly. And if it's an udhr which is khafi, which cannot be seen openly, then in such a case they're not allowed to eat publicly. The fourth fasl, it is ahkam al-imsak, the rulings regarding al-imsak. These are the cases when a person is not considered to be a sa'im, to be fasting, but they are still required to withhold from eating or drinking and from any other thing which would break siyam. There are many cases, or a few, not many, but 5 or 6 cases in which ahkam al-imsak, or in which a person is obligated to do al-imsak. The first case is in qamat al-bayyinatu fi athna'i an-nahar anna al-yawm Ramadan. If during the middle of the day they're not fasting, and they find out in the middle of the day that today is Ramadan, they didn't know, and then they find out that the day is Ramadan, here they have to do imsak, meaning they have to not eat or drink or have sexual intercourse or any other thing which would break their fast for the rest of that day, even though they're not considered to be fasting. So that's the case when a person finds out that it's Ramadan during the middle of the day. And this is not counted as fasting for them. It's not la yu'addu sawman. It's not counted as fasting. So they would still be obligated to make up this day another time. Likewise, like that as well, a person who wakes up in the morning in any day of Ramadan and they had not made their intention during the night. They, for example, slept throughout the whole night without at any point being awake, so they didn't make any intention. Then in the morning, they wake up and they haven't made intention to fast. Here, obviously, they cannot fast since they didn't have intention, but they are obligated to do imsak, meaning to withhold from eating and drinking for the rest of the day. Likewise, man sara ahlan lis-sawm fi athna'i an-nahar, a person who becomes obligated to fast in the middle of the day. For example, a person who was a kafir, then he became Muslim during the middle of the day, or they were a child and they reached puberty during the middle of the day, or a woman who was on her menstruation, then her menstruation ended during the middle of the day. All of these cases, the person, likewise a majnoon, person who is insane, and then they return to the aql in the middle of the day. In such a case, obviously, they cannot fast because they were not from Ahl al-Siyam in the beginning of the day. But they are obligated to withhold from eating and drinking and having sexual intercourse for the remainder of the day. And then they are also required to do qada to make up this day. Likewise, كل من زال عذره المبيح للفطر. Anyone whose udhr, whose excuse for fasting, for breaking the fast, ends during the middle of the day. For example, a person who's a traveler, then the travel ended during the middle of the day. For example, they reached their destination, or they no longer wanted to travel, but they intended to do iqamah in the place they are for more than 4 days. Or if the person was sick and then they became healthy during the middle of the day, once their excuse has ended, they have to withhold from eating and drinking and having a sexual intercourse and any other muftir for the remainder of the day. Likewise, if a person broke their siyam with an excuse, with an udhr, for example, a person who fears dying due to dehydration, or they had shabaq, as was mentioned earlier, and then they broke their fast due to this excuse. Once the udhr has ended, they have to do imsak for the remainder of the day until the harm returns. So once the harm returns, then they can break their fast again. For example, if the person had, if they were very dehydrated and they feared that they were going to die, so then they drank some water in order to remove this harm, then they have to withhold after that from any drinking or any other muftir. If later on in the day they have another excuse for breaking their fast again, or if the harm returns, then they can drink a second time, but they cannot drink during that time when there's no harm upon them. Rather, they have to do imsak. And in all of the cases where a person is obligated to do imsak, they have reward for imsak. And since this is an ibadah, a worship, it has reward, but the reward is not the reward of siyam. Rather, it is less than that. Likewise, a person who breaks their fast without any excuse in the middle of the day, they have to also do imsak. Even if after that they have an excuse such as safar, traveling, or menstruation, they still have to remain doing imsak in this case. So if a person breaks their fast without an excuse, then they have to do imsak. Then an excuse comes after that for breaking the fast, such as traveling. Here they still have to continue doing imsak because they were sinful in breaking the fast in the first place. And all of the rulings which I mentioned now regarding imsak, the cases where a person has to withhold from eating or drinking, this only applies, and all of these rulings only apply in the month of Ramadan, because the hurma is lil waqt nafsi, that the time itself is holy. It is sacred. Since the time itself is sacred, the person has to withhold from eating and drinking and so on, even if they're not considered to be fasting. As for in other months outside of Ramadan, if a person breaks their fasting, which is an obligatory fast, they don't have to do imsak for the rest of the day. Rather, imsak only applies when it's the month of Ramadan. The fifth section, now we're speaking about mufsidat as-sawm, and this is probably the most important section. The rulings regarding the things which break one's fast. وهي ثمانية, there are 8 things which break a person's fast. The first is aridda, apostasy, that breaks one's fast, which is obvious. Al-maut, death, also breaks one's fast, which is also obvious. The third is al-hayd wal-nifas, menstruation and post-birth bleeding. Both of these also break one's fast. And the fasting is broken by the mere reaching of the blood to the qubul al-mar'ah, to her front private parts. So, even if the blood doesn't come out, but it reaches the front private parts of the woman, here, the fasting becomes invalid. The fourth thing which breaks one's fast is al-akl wa-shurb wa nahwuhuma, eating and drinking, and anything which has the ruling of eating and drinking. So that's eating, drinking, and putting anything, whether the person puts it in themselves or someone else puts it with the permission, to put anything into one of 4 places. And if anything reaches one of these 4 areas of the body, then the fast becomes broken. Al-halq, the throat. Wal-jawf, you could say the torso, the middle of the body, from below the neck all the way to one's hips. This whole area, anything which enters into the jawf. Wad-dubur, anything which enters into one's rectum. And ad-dimagh, anything which enters into one's skull. Anything which enters into any of these 4 places of the body, it breaks one's fasting. even if the thing which enters into the body is something which is غير مغذي, if it's something which doesn't have nutrients, such as a rock. A person can't digest rock, but the rock entering into one's stomach or into their throat, this would break the fast, even if it's something which doesn't have any nutrients, even if it's something which cannot dissolve. And this is only if they put it themselves, and if they themselves put something into one of these 4 areas. Or you could generally say that these areas are the digestive system, because from the throat all the way to the rectum, this is all the digestive system, as well as the skull or the brain, because الدماغ أحد الجوفين, according to the fuqaha. So anything which is put into the digestive system from the person's own action, they intend to put it in, or if someone else puts it in, but they give permission for them to do so, then in such a case, the fasting is broken. لا إن أدخل شيئا في إحليله. If a person puts something inside the hole of their penis, then this does not break the fast, because it's not a manfad. It doesn't reach the jawf, it doesn't reach the torso. Likewise, anything which if a person was to put anything within the private parts of the front private parts of a woman, also, according to the most correct opinion of the madhab, this also does not break the fast. بخلاف الإقناع. خلاف الإقناع. As for الإقناع, it says that anything put inside the front private parts of a woman would break the fast. But according to the relied upon position of the madhab, no, that does not break the fast, because it's also not a manfad. So if a person was to, for example, use kuhl, or to put something in their eye, then the asl is that it doesn't break the fast, because it's not necessarily a manfad. It doesn't reach any of the places mentioned before. إلا إذا علم وصوله إلى الحق. If he knows for certain that this thing which they put in their eye, for example, eye droplets, they know for certain they reach their throat. For example, they found it, they tasted it in their throat, or they could taste its bitterness in their throat, for example. If they know for certain that it reached their throat, then this breaks their fast. And لا يكفي الظن, and it's not sufficient for them to just think that it might have reached their throat, but if they know for certain they reached their throat, then this breaks their fast. Likewise, if they know for certain they reached the brain or the skull. Likewise, من استعطى, if someone puts something in their nose, then this also, if they know that it reached their throat, this breaks their fast. If they think it didn't reach their throat, then it does not break their fast. But according to Al-Kafi, and Ibn Qudama in Al-Kafi says, even if it reaches the nostrils, not the nostrils, but sinuses in the nose, then Ibn Qudama says that even that breaks the fast. But the mu'tamad of the madhab is, it only breaks the fast if it reaches one of the 4 places mentioned, the throat or the brain or the torso or the rectum. What about a person who swallows their own saliva? Swallowing one's saliva, which is inside their mouth, this does not break the fast. But if they take their saliva out to where their lips are, yani they take their saliva out of their mouth and onto their lips or beyond their lips, then they put it back in and swallow it, then this breaks their fast. So if they were to, for example, bring out their saliva, then lick their lips and swallow that again, then this breaks the fast, because once it has exited mouth and put back in, that's as if they put it in yani straight away from outside. Except for the saliva on their tongue. Technically, the saliva which is on your tongue, when you put your tongue out of your mouth and you put it back in and you swallow that, this does not apply to it. Rather, this would not break the fast. The saliva which stays on your tongue if they put their tongue out of their beyond their lips, out of their mouth. So that does not break the fast, even if that saliva which was on their tongue was a lot. As long as it remains on the tongue. As if they took it off the tongue, then put it back on, then this would break their fast. Likewise, it doesn't break their fast if a small amount of saliva goes on something which they take out of their mouth, and if they were to put that back in, then this would also not break their fast. For example, if they were to put their finger in their mouth or something like that, or if they were to put a string, tooth floss or something, take that out and then put it back in. There's such a thing, since the amount of saliva in that is negligible, this also does not break the fast. Now, and this is only, it doesn't break the fast if it's a small amount of saliva. As for if in this case, when they put something in their mouth and take it out and put that thing back in their mouth again, like a tooth floss or something, if the amount of saliva on it is a lot, then that would break the fast. But if it's a small amount, then it would not. Another ruling which is similar to which has the ruling of eating and drinking as well, is if a person swallows, for example, if vomit or mucus or phlegm, it comes up and into their mouth, then they swallow it from their mouth back down after it has reached the mouth, this also breaks the fast. First, the sawmuhu. This is in the case where it reaches the mouth and then he swallows it back. And the mouth is considered from the makhraj of kha, the place where the person enunciates the letter of kha. That's where the mouth begins from. So if it reaches up to the makhraj of kha, past it, and then the person swallows it, this breaks their fast. As for if it's below the makhraj of kha, then if they can swallow it and they would not break their fast. Another ruling similar to this, or not necessarily similar, but similar enough, it is man tanajjasa riquhu. If the person's saliva, if some najasa goes in their saliva, for example, blood is najis. So if blood mixes with their saliva or any other impure substance, they are obligated to spit out that saliva to clean up their mouth until there's no remaining sign or athar of that najasa. If they don't do that and they just swallow that saliva which had najasa in it, then here the fasting is broken, even if the person didn't intend to swallow it, even if they swallowed it by accident. So if the saliva mixes with some najasa, they are obligated to spit it out. If they swallow it, then the fasting is broken. If they know for certain that they swallowed that najasa, if they're not sure whether they swallowed najasa or not, then in such a case, the fasting is still valid. What about putting something in one's mouth, like gum or anything similar to that? إن أدخل في فيه طعاما ونحوه بقصد أو ذاقه أو مضغ علكا أو علكا فوجد طعمه في حلقه أفطر. If a person puts something in their mouth, whether it's food or anything else, anything which they put in their mouth intentionally, or if they were to taste something or lick something, if they find the taste in their throat, if they can taste it, that it went down to their throat, then their fasting is broken. So a person's chewing gum in Ramadan, if they taste the taste of gum going down into their throat, then this has broken their fast. Or anything else which you put in your mouth. If you can taste, if the taste goes down to your throat, that means you have and you swallowed a part of it, so therefore your fasting is broken. If a person wakes up in the morning, or they enter into Fajr time, and there's something within their mouth, meaning they were eating sahur, and there's still some leftover food in their mouth, then they're obligated to spit it out. If they spit it out, then their fasting is still valid. If they don't spit it out, if they're not able to spit it out, and they swallow it without intending to swallow it, if they swallow it by accident, something which was already in their mouth before entering into Fajr time, then when they entered into Fajr or in the morning, they had something in their mouth. The ruling is they have to spit out. If they can't spit it out, so they have to keep it in their mouth for some reason. Here, if they keep it in their mouth for some udhr, then they swallow it by accident. Here, they are not obligated to break. Their fast is still valid, and they continue in their fast. So this is different to putting something in your mouth intentionally. If you put something in your mouth intentionally, then swallow it, this breaks your fast whether you intended to swallow it or not. But if there's something in your mouth already beforehand, and you're not able to spit it out for some excuse, then you swallow it accidentally, this does not break your fast. The fifth thing which breaks one's fast is ta'ammudul qay, a person who makes themselves vomit, or is al-istiqa'ah, a person who intentionally makes themselves vomit. So regardless of whether this vomit is food, or it's blood or water or mucus, anything which a person makes themselves vomit, then this breaks the fast. Now the mucus which is within the throat, if a person spits this out, this is not considered vomiting. Vomiting is if it comes from the jawf. So if they were to pull up mucus somehow, or make something come out from their torso, from their stomach, or from their lungs, and spit that out, and you make that thing come out intentionally, this breaks their fast. This is al-qay. As for a person vomits unintentionally, the vomit overcomes them, then in such a case, this does not break the fast. The sixth mufsid is al-hijama, a person getting hijama done. the person who does the hijama and the one who it's done to, both of them have their fast broken. And this is only in the case if in ظهر الدم, if the blood comes out. As for if they do hijama, or if they begin doing hijama when they're pumping it up and the blood hasn't came out yet, here the fast is not broken. Once the blood comes out by hijama, then both the one who is doing the hijama and the one who is done to, both of them have to make up their fast. Their fast is broken. And this is specific to the ruling. The ruling is specific to hijama. As for other ways of taking out blood from the body, such as blood donations, such as a cut on the arm or anything like that, the fast and so on, all of those do not break the fast. The only one which breaks the fast is hijama, because the hukm is ta'abudi. The seventh mufsid, it is al-inzal binahwi al-mubashara. A person who ejaculates by certain means. So if a person masturbates, istimna, or if they kiss a person, a woman, their wife and so on, or if they touch with shahwa, or similar actions, mubashara, physically having physical contact with them, if this physical contact or masturbation or kissing causes them to ejaculate semen, or even if madhi comes out, pre-ejaculation, pre-seminal fluid, in both of these cases, whether it's mani or madhi, their fast is broken. The fast is broken. As for if it's with nadhar only, they were only looking, they didn't have any physical contact, or there was takrar nadhar, repeated looking, then it breaks their fast if they ejaculate semen, al-mani. As for al-madhi, it does not break the fast. طبعا al-mani, it applies to a man, but there's an equivalent which also applies to the female, which if they ejaculate, it would also break their it's also called mani according to the fiqh. The ejaculation of a female would also break their fast. Now, as for al-tafkir faqat, a person merely thinking about something, if they were to think about something and then ejaculate without looking, without repeated looks, and without physical contact, then this does not break their fast, even if they were to ejaculate. Likewise, where dreams do not break one's fast. And likewise, if they were to ejaculate without any desire, such as because of some illness or so on, then all of this does not break the fast as well. Likewise, in كان السبب الإنزال واقعا في النهار لم يكن عفوا إن لم يكن سبب الإنزال واقعا في النهار. If the reason for the ejaculation occurred before daytime, if it occurred at nighttime, for example, a person was being intimate with their wife during the night, then they stopped being intimate at Fajr time, but then the person ejaculated due to that intimacy after Fajr had entered. Here, because the reason for the ejaculation occurred before the night time, here the fast is valid and it's not broken. Likewise, if a person was having sexual intercourse and they stopped before Fajr time and then they ejaculated after Fajr, this would also not break their fast. Likewise, the opposite, if they're having physical contact or doing something other than sexual, other than intercourse, the other means for ejaculation, if they were to do any of that during the day and the ejaculation occurs after Maghrib. For example, if a person was to masturbate during the day of Ramadan, but no mani or madhi came out except after Maghrib, then here also the fasting is still valid. The fast is not broken. And all of the asbab, also an-naz'u jima', okay, we'll mention that later inshallah. These asbab or muftirat, these things which break the fitr, which were mentioned just now, eating and drinking, hijama, vomiting, and al-inzal, ejaculation, all of these, they only break the fast if the person if they do it intentionally, if they do this action intentionally, and if they remember that they are fasting. As for if they didn't do it intentionally, rather they were forced, for example, or they had forgotten that they were fasting, then in such a case, or they didn't intend this action, it happened accidentally, then in such a case, the fasting is still valid, and it's not broken. لم يفسد صومه. So here, what's condition is intending to do the action, not intending to break your fast. Even if the person doesn't intend to break their fast, but they intended to do the action which led to them breaking the fast, such as, for example, kissing their wife, and they intended to kiss their wife, but they didn't intend to reach the extent of ejaculating, but they did. This would break the fast. And لا يشترط العلم بالحكم. It's not a condition that the person has to have knowledge of the ruling. They might say, I didn't know that ejaculation breaks the fast. That would still count as it having broken the fast, and they would have to make up the day. And also, it's obligatory to remind someone who, if a person was to eat, forgetting that they're fasting, we'd say that the fast is not broken. But if you see someone eating due to forgetfulness, you have to remind them. يجب إعلام جاهل بمثله. The final thing which is a mufsid للصوم is al-jima', sexual intercourse, يعني penetration. This breaks the fasting if a man has intercourse, or it is done to him. يعني, for example, if the man was sleeping and his wife was to have intercourse with him while he was sleeping. In both these cases, the person's fasting is broken. أنزل أو لم ينزل سواء, يعني regardless of whether they ejaculated or they didn't ejaculate. ولو كان ناسيا أو مكرها أو نائما أو مخطئا. And this also, we don't take into consideration here whether they remembered they were fasting or not, whether they were forced or not, whether they were sleeping or not, whether it was accidental or not. Any case where this intercourse occurred, penetration, بذكر أصلي في فرج أصلي, يعني has to be in a both of the private parts are أصلي, يعني not in the case where it's a خنثى, where it's a not يعني a intersex, because the real private parts are not clear. When it's ذكر أصلي في فرج أصلي, this breaks the fast unrestrictedly, and there's no difference between it being in the front passage or the back passage, even though of course intercourse in the back passage is a major sin. And also there's no difference between it being the private parts being those of a living human or a dead human or even an animal. In all of these cases, if penetration was to occur in في فرج أصلي بذكر أصلي, this would break the fast. And even if it is with a barrier, even if the intercourse occurs with a barrier, yani if the penis was to be, or if the private parts were to be wrapped in something, this would also break the fast. على الصحيح من المذهب, according to that which is most correct. والنزع جماع, also, yani the nazr, which is pulling out from intercourse, this is technically considered to be jima'. So if a person was to have intercourse during the night, then Fajr comes in and they are still doing penetration and they want to come out. When they pull out, this pulling out is considered jima', so therefore they are obligated to make up that fast and to also give kafara, even though they wouldn't be sinful in this case, because as long as they knew that, as long as they didn't know that Fajr was about to come, then even though they're not sinful, they are still obligated to make up the fast and also give kafara. Now, so in the case of jima', this is the only muftir. This is the only thing which if the person does, they have to make up the day, and they also have to give kafara. They also have to give expiation, which I'll mention later, inshallah, what that expiation is. Now, some of the rulings regarding the mufsidat of Sawm, things which break the Sawm. A person, if they were to break the fast, or if they were to do something which would break their fast, such as eating and drinking, whilst they think that it's still nighttime, they don't think that Fajr has entered, so they continue to eat or drink, or if they have doubt whether Fajr has entered or not, then this is permissible. As long as they don't know or they don't think that Fajr has entered, they can continue to do any muftarat, to eat or drink or have sexual intercourse, and the fasting is valid as long as they don't know that Fajr had actually entered. If they were to find out, يعني إن بان له خطأه وجب عليه القضاء, if he was to find out for certain that he had, or if that person was to find out for certain that they had ate or drank or done another muftir after Fajr had entered, even though they didn't think Fajr had entered, but now they know for certain that it had, then here the fasting is invalid and they would have to make up the day. But as long as they don't know for sure whether Fajr has entered, they have doubts, then they can continue to eat and drink, and their fasting is valid. For example, if one person was to say Fajr has entered, and the second person said no, it hasn't entered yet, so he doesn't know which one of them is correct, then he can continue to eat and drink, because the asl is that al-aslu baqa al-layl, the asl is that the night is still continuing. So so if two people say, if one says that night has entered, one says that Fajr has entered, and the second says that it has not, then they can continue to eat or drink as long as they are unsure which one is correct. As for the case where if a person was to eat or drink after, during the day, if they think that sunset has occurred, that Maghrib has entered, then it becomes clear that Maghrib has not entered. They thought it had, but it didn't actually. Here, their fasting is invalid, and they have broken their fast, and they have to make up the day. So if a person thinks that the adhan has gone, and they start eating, then they find out that the adhan is after 10 minutes. So they ate before the time. Here, the fasting is broken, and they have to make up the day. Even though the asl is that if a person thinks that Maghrib has entered, they can eat. If they have a dhann, if they assume or think that Maghrib has entered, they can eat or drink. If they have doubt whether Maghrib has entered, do we say it's like Fajr? We said if they have doubt whether Fajr has entered, they can continue to drink. If they have doubt whether Maghrib has entered, they cannot break their fast. They have to continue to fast until they think that Maghrib has entered. So doubt is not sufficient here. If they do eat or drink in this case of doubt, they doubt whether Maghrib has entered or not, then they ate or drank. If it becomes clear that Maghrib had actually entered, then they don't have to make it up because they only broke their fast after Maghrib. If it doesn't become clear whether Maghrib had entered or not, then they would have to make up the fast in this case. And after that, the Al-Fasl Sadis, the sixth section, it is Al-Mustahabbat wal-Makruhat, the things which are recommended for a person who is fasting, and things which are disliked. So starting with things which are disliked, the first thing is for a person to gather the saliva in their mouth, then swallow it. For a person to gather their saliva in their mouth, then swallow it, this is disliked, makruh, but it does not break the fast. Rather, the only one which breaks the fast, as we mentioned, is for the person to take their saliva out of their mouth and put it back in. So we said swallowing the saliva, this is makruh. As for swallowing al-nukhama, phlegm or mucus which reaches the mouth, then as we said earlier, this breaks the fast. And it's also haram. And the most correct position of the madhab is it's haram to swallow phlegm once it reaches the mouth, even when a person is not fasting. It's haram in all cases, but obviously if a person is fasting, then that's when their fast is broken. As for tasting food, for example, a person is cooking and they want to taste some of the food to see whether it's not too salty and so on. If this is done لغير حاجة, if it's done without a need, then this is makruh. Obviously, here the tasting is just for the person to put it on their tongue, not for them to swallow it. For them to put it on their tongue, then to spit it out. If they swallow it, then obviously this breaks the fast, as was mentioned earlier. But if they just put something on their tongue to taste it, then they spit it out without swallowing it, then if this is done without any need, then this is makruh. As for if it's done for a need, then it's mubah, it's permissible, according to the most correct position in the madhab. And the second opinion is that it's makruh even in that case, but the sahih from madhab is that it is makruh. So based on the first opinion, that it's permissible when there's a haja, a need, then if a person was to do that, if they were to taste something due to that need, such as cooking, then they spit it out. واستقصى في البصق, or the basaq, they try their best to spit out as much as possible. Then after that, if they were to find the taste reach their throat by accident, then here the fast is still valid. لم يفطر. As long as they try their best to spit it out. As for if they didn't try to spit it out, or they were being complacent in it, then if the taste reaches their throat, then this breaks their fast. This is based on the first opinion, that it's permissible when there's a haja. As for based on the second opinion, that it's not permissible, that it's makruh even if there's a need, then in such a case, if the person finds the taste in their throat, it would break their fast even if they did istiqsa. Now the next makruh, the next thing which is disliked for a person who is fasting is to leave food between their teeth. And if they eat in the night, it's makruh for them to leave food between their teeth, because they might, because they're supposed to remove it so they don't swallow it. So leaving the food there, it would be disliked. Likewise, it's disliked for a person to smell something which might go up into their nose, for example, if it's something which is powdery or something like that, if they would smell it and pull it up, it could go into their nose and then reach the throat, such as bakhur and so on. Then smelling such a thing, it would be disliked for them. As for in the case when they're smelling something which it's not going to go inside their nose, for example, smelling a flower, then this is permissible. There's nothing makruh about that. As for chewing on gum or something else in the mouth, if the thing which they're chewing on, it breaks up, يتحلل, it dissolves in the mouth or breaks up, then it's haram to chew. Even if the person wasn't to swallow it or wasn't to swallow the saliva, it'd still be haram to chew. As for chewing something which doesn't break up in the mouth, doesn't dissolve in the mouth, then this is makruh. And in both cases, as mentioned earlier, if they found that the taste reached the throat, then that's when the fast is broken. If the taste does not reach the throat, then it does not break the fast. Other things which are makruh also, قبلة التلذذ, for a person to kiss their wife with shahwa, with desire. This is makruh during Ramadan. Likewise, any other physical interaction which would be min dawa'i al-wat, which could lead to them having sexual intercourse or something like that, which increases one's desires. Such things are all makruh. If the person doesn't think that they're going to ejaculate. If they think they're going to ejaculate, then it becomes haram for them. If they don't think they're going to ejaculate, then having any sort of intimacy which raises desires, it would be makruh. As for a kiss which is tawaddud, which is out of love and rahmah, and not out of desires, then that is mubah, permissible. And likewise, if a person was to have physical contact and things with their wife without the desires being moved, then in such a case, it is also mubah. Another thing which is makruh, it is al-mubalagha fil madmada wal istinshaq. It is disliked for a person to overdo, to exaggerate in their madmada, washing their mouth, and istinshaq, washing their nose in wudu. This is disliked for a person who is fasting. Of course, outside of fasting, it's mustahab to do mubalagha fil madmada wal istinshaq. As for a person who is fasting, it is disliked. Likewise, az-ziyada ala thalatha, to wash their mouth and nose more than 3 times, and this is also makruh. In fact, this is actually makruh even when a person is not fasting. Az-ziyada ala thalatha fil wudu, makruha. That's if they're not doing it in order to remove some najasa, impurity. If they're doing it to remove some najasa or some other shay qadir, something which is unclean, then it's mubah to wash it more than 3 times. As for if it's not for that purpose, then it's makruh to wash more than 3 times. Likewise, it's disliked to put water in their mouth or nose, abathan, for no reason. When it's in wudu, obviously, it's from the obligations of wudu. If it's not for wudu, then just doing it for no reason, then this is also makruh. Likewise, it's makruh, even if the purpose the person does this for is to cool themselves down. Putting water in your mouth and spitting it out during fasting in order to cool your mouth down, or to remove some of your thirst, this is makruh. As for swimming or having a shower and things like that, and not putting in your mouth and nose during fasting, then this is mubah. It's permissible. In the case of al-madmada wal istinshaq, if a person puts the mouth, washing the mouth and nose, or in ghusl, or in swimming and so on, if a person swallows water accidentally, then this does not break the wudu. If they swallow it on purpose, then that breaks the wudu. It does not break their fast if they swallow it accidentally. If they swallow it on purpose, then it breaks the fast. Other rulings. Now, some of the things which are haram for a person who is fasting. Al-ghiba, backbiting, is haram at all times, and it's even more haram for a person who is fasting. That's obviously al-ghiba, which is muharrama. There are cases where ghiba becomes permissible, in which case it's permissible. Likewise, lying is haram at all times, and in Ramadan, and for a person fasting, it's even more of a sin, except for when it's permissible to lie, such as to save someone who is innocent and so on. Likewise, insulting someone or speaking with foul language or spreading rumors and things like that. All of these things are haram in Ramadan and outside of Ramadan, but the sin is more in Ramadan. And likewise, the ruling applies to any time or place which is sacred. Sins in it are worse than in other times and places. And these things do not break the fast according to all four madhahib, lying or backbiting and so on. These things do not break one's fast according to all four madhahib. Now, in terms of the things which are recommended for a person who is fasting, leaving off every makruh speech, it is recommended outside of Ramadan and also inside of Ramadan. Likewise, leaving off kalamun mubah la ya'ni, speech which is permissible, but he does not need to speak it. Speech which is not necessary. Then this is also recommended to leave off. And if a person is insulted whilst fasting, it's recommended for them to say, Ana sa'im, for them to say, I am fasting, to the person who insults them. It's recommended to say that twice or three times. As for saying it more than three times, then this is not recommended. And should they say it out loud or quietly? If they're fasting in Ramadan, then it's recommended to say it to the person out loud. As for if it's other than Ramadan, outside Ramadan, then it's recommended for them to say that quietly. Why? Because so that they hide their good deeds. They don't tell them that they're fasting. From the recommendations also are ta'jil al-fitr, to break your fast quickly. Once the person knows that ghurub shams has occurred, the sun has set, it's recommended to break your fast quickly. As for when they think that the sun has set, but they're not certain, then it's permissible to break it, but it only becomes recommended to break once they know that the sun has set. Also, it's recommended to break your fast before Salat al-Maghrib. Before you pray Maghrib, it's recommended to break your fast first, then to pray Salah after that. As for when the person is unsure whether the sun has set or not, then here it's haram to break their fast, as was mentioned earlier. What's sufficient for a person to break a fast? خَبَرُ ثِقَةٍ وَاحِدٍ is sufficient for a person to break a fast. So if one trustworthy person says that the sun has set, you can break your fast based on that statement or testimony. When breaking your fast, it's recommended to break with rutab, yani dates which are not dry, yani fresh dates. If he doesn't have dates which are fresh, then dry dates, tamr. And if there's no tamr, then drinking water. Once the person or when the person is breaking the fast, it's recommended to make dua before breaking the fast. Then da'wat as-sa'im la turad, as the hadith mentions. Likewise, it's recommended to make dua after breaking the fast with those du'as which are narrated in the sunnah. Once the sun has set, the fast is broken hukman, meaning even if they don't eat or drink, the ruling of fasting has ended for them, so they are muftir hukman, even if they don't drink or eat. It's also recommended to do taftir ghayrik, yani to break someone else's fast for them, yani to give them tamr or water or something so that they can break them, and also to feed them. This also is recommended. And as for sahur, it's recommended to have sahur and to delay it as long as the person doesn't think that Fajr has entered. To delay it as much as possible is recommended. And it's permissible to have sahur as long as the person is not sure that the sun has risen. And it's not makruh as long as the person has shak whether Fajr has entered or not. And sahur, the person gets the reward for having it from after midnight. This fil layl, from then that's when the time of sahur applies. And in order to get the reward and to fulfill the sunnah, it's sufficient for even a person to have a sip of water. Anything eaten or drank would be sufficient, but in order to get the full reward, it's recommended the person eats and drinks, not just drinks. Having intercourse, we said in the night, it's permissible. If the person doubts that Fajr has entered and they continue to have intercourse, then this is makruh. If they have doubt whether Fajr has entered or not, and they continue to have intercourse, then this is makruh. If later it becomes clear that Fajr had entered, then of course this would mean that they would have to do qada, make up their fast, and also give kafara. And the final ruling of things which are recommended in Ramadan, it is to read lots of Quran and dhikr and give sadaqah and perform umrah. And umrah is recommended to do as much as possible in Ramadan, since each umrah has the reward of hajj. Now, obviously, there are still some masail left, but it's probably best for those to be discussed at another time, inshallah. يعني نكتفي بهذا القدر والله أعلم صلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. The brother asked, what about mouth washing? Using mouthwash, this would be makruh according to the madhab, because putting anything into your mouth بغير حاجة, this is makruh, and if the person was to find the taste reach their throat, then this would break their fast. Same ruling applies to brushing your teeth during the fasting time. This would be, the person should brush their teeth before the Fajr and after Maghrib. As for brushing it during the daytime, then this would be makruh. And if the person has, if there's no hajj, if there's no need to do so, and if the toothpaste reaches their throat, then this would break their fast. Any other questions? If not, we will end it here, inshallah. I think, person, if you have a question, you can click there to raise your hand, and then I'll give you permission to speak, or you can leave a message under the tweet. No questions? Okay, then we'll end it here, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.